Dennis, I'm gonna pose to you a tough question, and I'm a little surprised Christopher hasn't posed it, but it's a problem for me in thinking about Christianity, particularly because of its relationship with Judaism. In looking at the teachings of Christ, you find a counsel of mercy, forgiveness, love, and so on. Even the atheists have a little bit of a hard time, although Christopher strains at the leash here. I have a little bit of a hard time attacking Jesus. It's a little bit hard to denounce the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. On the other hand, there are some passages in the Old Testament that do give one pause. Ideas of an Old Testament God who seems vengeful, who identifies so completely with one group that the enemies of this group become the enemies of God. These people are wiped out, decimated, their children taken into slavery. How do you explain those passages?
I do explain the passages, and then I have a rebuttal for you then. But first, the enemies of Israel are only wiped out to the extent, first of all, they're never fully wiped out. I mean, but whatever it is, they're certainly warred on and they're decimated, if not wiped out. But in any event, only because of their evil, and the Torah makes that clear. The first 5 books of Moses, that they had to reach a level of evil where they deserved it, and the evil was almost always identified as child sacrifice. That is what the Canaanites engaged in. The greatness of the Hebrew Bible, and since we're now making these comparisons, and everyone here who knows anything about me knows of my gratitude and respect and every good feeling toward America's Christians and toward the contribution of Christianity in this country specifically and elsewhere as well. But if you are going to make that comparison, I find it far more morally troubling that in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, it is filled with Jewish self-criticism. The villains of the Hebrew Bible are the Hebrews, not non-Jews, Jews. But that is not the case in the New Testament. The Christians are terrific. The Jews of the Jewish Bible stink, with a handful of exceptions. The self-criticism, the constant saying about how bad they are. They get out of Egypt, they build a golden calf after all of the miracles. So this comparison is not one I like making, but since you've opened this Pandora's box, I am very welcome to making that comparison. Secondly, the Jews' God judged everybody, including pagans, by their decency, not by their belief. The Jew who reads the New Testament, and I have spectacular respect for what the New Testament has created, especially in the greatest country in the world. But I remember when I first read it, I was stunned at the amount of people who ended up in hell. And this was something totally foreign to me as a Jew, where people were punished solely because they were bad, never because of their wrong beliefs. So, and finally, the God of the Old Testament is the one who said, "Love your neighbor as yourself. I am God." Leviticus 19:18. It's literally the center of the Torah. It's in the middle of the 3rd book of the Bible.
Thank you. I'm quite sure there's more to be said on punishment and hell in the next few minutes. I'm going to suggest, for the sake of time and to allow for questions, that because this is your penultimate statements, let's try and truncate them to 3 minutes, 3 to 4 right now in the rebuttals. And then maybe we'll do more of a worldwide wrestling approach to the final cross-exam. So, Mr. Hitchens, 3 to 4 minutes?
I'm very happy to be able to agree with Dennis in his last point. The great advantage of Judaism is its engagement with Hellenism. Dinesh said that the pillars were Athens and Jerusalem. Actually, you have to pretty much choose between Athens and Jerusalem. And Orthodox Judaism very strongly emphasizes this point by describing as the heretic the Epikoros. I'm sure I'm telling you something that most of you already know. The Epicurean, the follower of Lucretius, and forcing people to confront this heresy and to say, this is the terrible thing the Hellenists and the Hellenized believe, and thus, in many cases, making people think, actually, it doesn't sound too bad. And this is a risk that Judaism is dialectically prepared to run, and I think it does make it both morally and intellectually superior to the fantasy of Christianity and the hideous idea of vicarious redemption by human sacrifice, that the morally obscene idea that by torturing somebody to death you can have your own sins taken away from you, commonly known in the bleaker bits of the Old Testament as scapegoating, something that's actively hideous and immoral as a belief. Now, I think I probably have to confront this question again of, or it may seem to you for the first time, of why is there something rather than nothing? The best answer I ever heard to this was by Professor Sidney Morgenbesser, who said, if there was nothing, you'd still be complaining. He was a great ironic figure. I think the question can be rephrased, if you will. 99% of all the species ever known to have existed on this planet, 99.8 actually, have ceased to exist, have become extinct. In our own solar system, we are the only planet that functions. All the others are either too damn hot or too damn cold, just in our own little cosmic suburb. And that's true of huge swathes of our own planet. And as you know, whatever you think about global warming, there's always a climatological crisis in our planet because it's always on a climatological knife edge between being too hot and being too cold. And one day it's going to just flame out. And that's just in the suburb where we live. If you look at it cosmologically and look at what Edwin Hubble discovered about the acceleration, the red shift, the rate at which the universe is expanding, it was very shocking for physicists to discover more recently that that rate is not declining, as Newtonian physics would suggest, but it's accelerating. The universe is exploding away faster than we thought it would. And very soon, we'll come to nothingness. Out of the somethingness we now do have, nothingness is absolutely built in. So that's some design for those of you who believe that this must have an author and a creator. Whoever did this is planning for nothingness as the next big thing. And in the meantime, the Andromeda Galaxy is headed directly for us and is due in about 4 billion years, which is tomorrow in evolutionary time.
Thank
And
you.
how do you like those apples?
Happy
And what
thoughts.
kind of designer is this? And it replaces the question exactly where philosophy poses it in the first place. If you assume a designer, how do you explain his incompetence? And how do you explain his cruelty, his callousness, his stupidity, and his indifference? And that question can't be evaded by any of the pseudo-scientific cleverness we've heard this evening. And real science, even the contemplation of it, will show that the question is hollow. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Prager.
Look, I said earlier, that I fully acknowledge, and every thoughtful religious person acknowledges, the problem of an unjust world. The alternative would have been a perfectly just world. I have a deep desire for a perfectly just world where nothing unjust could happen, nobody could hurt anybody, no man could rape a woman, no parent could abuse a child, where there was no premenstrual syndrome. I mean, there is, I could imagine a perfect world in many ways. Would the world be one worth living in? I don't know. What happens to give meaning to life, ironically, is for one thing, death. I mean, if I knew I was going to live forever, I'm not sure how much I would read, because I know why should I read that book? I could read it 2,000 years from now. Why should I get out of bed? I'm here forever. I don't have perfect answers for this, but the alternative doesn't fill me, frankly, with great desire either. The Jewish view is that God did make an uncompleted world, and it is the human task to repair it, to complete it. That's why the traditional understanding for circumcision on the 8th day, the 7 days of creation, 6 plus the day of rest, and on the 8th day, we're already manipulating nature, as if to say, it wasn't perfect, the human body, we'll make it a little better and get rid of the foreskin. Whatever you have to say about it, it's a symbolic notion that we are here. I don't lament the loss of my foreskin, Christopher, so it is not an issue I want to get into. It's among the many trauma of my life that has not been high on the list.
Never by crackling from a moil.
Okay, now,